Do you take pleasure in baking yourself in a claustrophobic tube to achieve beauty? If this sounds like something you've done in your lifetime, then have we got a podcast episode for you. Hi, I'm Katie.
And I'm Danny, and I cannot stop laughing at that intro line.
If you know, you know, right?
Yeah.
And today on Generation in Between, a Xennial Podcast, we're going to be talking about that staple of 90s and early 2000s life, the tanning bed.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yes. So let's just start kind of with our personal experiences. Danny, did you ever go to tanning beds?
Girl, yes. I have crazy stories for every topic we talk about, I swear. So when we talked about doing this, I totally forgot that I even did this. When I was in college, me and all my sorority sisters went to the cheapest place in town to tan, right? Because everybody went to the tanning bed. That was a white sorority girl during this time. And where we went was a hair salon, but the hair salon was in a trailer. Okay.
Oh.
So the back of the trailer was the tanning place. The front of the trailer was the hair salon. And you would pay like one fee for like unlimited tanning for like the month, right? So you would call and like see if the beds were open and like zoom over to the trailer and go to the tanning bed. So yes, I did go to the tanning bed. Did you?
Yes, I did. Same kind of thing. In
a trailer?
It wasn't a trailer, but it wasn't super classy. So It was kind of, I went different places. When I was still in high school and I would go, so I probably started going pretty regularly when I was around 16. And it was kind of just this like hole in the wall storefront that was attached to, I think, like maybe like a smoke shop or something. And it was this older couple. They were super tan.
Oh, yeah.
This was like their retirement plan, owning this tanning salon. And they specialized in the stand-up tanning booths. So I would go for those. And I believe they were a little faster. I think they were like 15 minutes or something. And you'd walk in and they had all these CDs. And they'd be like, which CD do you want? And you would pick out your CD.
So mood tanning.
And they could pipe it into each place. Ooh. So like I think they had like 3 booths, but maybe 4. They could pipe in your custom music.
Fancy.
So it was like In Sync while I'm in there, Britney, whatever I wanted, some country music. They had a lot of country music. And they were almost like, it sounds kind of weird, but they were like kind of important adults in my life in a way, because they would see me so much. They'd be talking to me. I don't even remember their names. I was recently in my hometown and I drove by it, and it's definitely not a tan, but it was.
Thank goodness.
So I don't know if it closed because of like some of the things we're going to talk about today, or they just actually retired, because we're talking 25 years ago that I was going. And I went in college too. Our neighborhood where all the college apartments were, same thing. Us girls would just go do that. That was on our schedule for the day.
Bake our skin.
Exactly.
Gross.
But I would say the last time I actually went in a tanning bed or booth was probably 2005.
I think the last time I went was before my wedding, which was also in 2005, which is bizarre because at the time we lived in South Texas. So like why I was going to a tanning bed and not just going outside, I don't know. I think I thought it was better for me. All those lies that we thought of. I'm sure we're going to go into there.
Yeah.
But that was the last time I went. Yeah.
Yeah. Same for me. And we're actually going to get into that, and as well as like some of the benefits, because it's not all bad. There are some benefits to tanning. Now, my personal opinion is that the risks far outweigh those.
Right.
Probably not worth it. But there are reasons that people like to go to tanning beds. Cosmetics one. We'll get into it. But there's some other ones too.
Okay.
So we'll jump into that. So actually, a lot of people still tan. The Food and Drug Administration estimates that about 30 million Americans use indoor tanning beds each year. And that includes 2.3 million teenagers.
Get out of here.
Yep.
But people still smoke, so I'm not surprised.
Yep,
people still tan.
Absolutely. And indoor tanning is most popular among young white women. So those white college girls, it's still a thing. Not just when we went, still going on. And it depends on the type of the country, the part of the country. This is an older study, but in 2010, the CDC found 44% of Midwestern white women ages 18 to 21, so Midwestern college girls, had used a tanning bed, along with 36% of women ages 22 to 25 in the South. So kind of to your point, people in the South are still doing it too. But yeah, and then another study, a 2014 study in the Journal of American Medicine and Dermatology, found that in the overall population, so all Americans, 35% of American adults have used a tanning bed at some point in their life. And that goes up for college students to 59% and 17% of teens. So that's a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
And then just in the past year, so not over their whole lifetime, that number was 13% of adults, so lower. 43% of university students, almost half, and then 10% of teens. But what I also learned is this is not just an American thing. That study I just mentioned also included people in Europe and Australia.
Interesting.
Where rates are comparable. Australia actually has a very high rate of people who go tanning, but they also have one of the highest rates per capita of melanoma in the world.
Well, that's interesting correlation. Makes sense.
It is. So again, we're gonna talk a little more about those risks as we go, but let's kind of like talk about the science a little bit about how it even works. Danny, if you had to explain it, just guessing, how does a tanning bed work, you think?
Okay, well, if you've never been to one, right? Basically, it looks like you're climbing into a coffin with light bulbs all throughout. Am I right?
Yeah, it does. And it closes on top of you.
And it closes on top of you, leaves a little crack. That's the worst. That was the worst part for me because it is very, I would have to keep my eyes closed. Like, well, you're not supposed to open your eyes, duh. But like, I hated that part. And it's these UV lights that are just amplified. So you only stay in for a short amount of time.
Right.
So my guess scientifically, which I don't know, Katie did the research on this one. I'm assuming it's like those UV lights you can buy for your house, like when you have seasonal depression and you live somewhere miserable where it's gray, except it's just amplified. So it bumps up the amount of UV you get, right? And the amount of time that your skin is exposed. Am I right?
Yep, that's basically it.
Yay.
Good job. So
look at that.
The scientific explanation is that tanning beds involve a device, a bed or a booth that emits ultraviolet radiation to produce a cosmetic tan.
So it's fake sun, but
fake sun,
like extra fake sun.
Correct.
Right?
That's right. So UVR is ultraviolet radiation. It is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So kind of as Danny said, we do get it anyway. But about 95% of that UVR that comes to the Earth is UVA, and only 5% is UVB. And then there's something like really bad that's UVC that doesn't ever make it to Earth. So what's kind of scary is tanning systems before the 1970s actually had some of that UVC in them. But the modern ones, it's not allowed. And there's a small amount of UVB and mostly UVA, like you said, in those concentrated amounts. And we kind of talked about trailers and storefronts, but you'll find these in gyms, spas, hotels, sporting facilities. A certain corporate gym that I go to it's included with your membership.
Even now, right?
Yeah, like yesterday I was there and people were signing up to use the tanning beds. And we live in Florida.
I know, right? That blows my mind too. When I used to work for a separate corporate gym years ago, early 2000s, when tanning was still on the regular, or maybe it was on its way out probably by then, because there was a lot more awareness, which we'll probably talk about with skin and sunscreen and skin safety, I guess. But yeah, it was part of your membership back then. And if you worked there, you could use it for free. But I didn't. I must have started to have sense then a little bit. Yeah. In regards to my skin, because I never used it. Yeah. I just thought about that. Yeah.
Good for you. Good for your little intuition.
But shame on your gym that still has it. No names being said.
No names being said, but yeah, they're there. And we kind of already touched on this, but these booths were first introduced in the 1960s. It actually started up in Scandinavia.
Interesting.
Which, I'm sure there's all different types of people there, but traditionally when you think of people there, they have lighter skin. And maybe they just didn't, it kind of, the source I found on that says the practice is a cultural parallel to skin whitening in some of the Asian countries. And in both cases, they both support multi-billion-dollar industries. So in other words, industries that are preying on your insecurity because of how you naturally look to give you like a quick fix to change the way you look.
And racial stereotypes that tell you what kind of beauty is the right kind of beauty, right? Which is weird because beauty is, what's the word I'm looking for here?
It's subjective.
Subjective.
Yeah.
I almost said objective, which it can be.
It can be. Objective is like the one where it's like, it's just a fact.
But we have societies that try and tell us for one way or another what is supposed to be beautiful, and it changes, right? Yeah. Because way back in the day, lighter, like, I guess we're only talking about like European skin. Lighter skin was seen as a sign of wealth because you weren't outside working. Right? Yeah. So it's interesting how that kind of flips and changes, but it all has these racial undertones of oppression and class. And
yeah, kind of to your point, one of the sources I read basically said what you just said, how lighter skin was sort of a sign of class. But then when people kind of came out of the fields and went more industrial, more inside, then the opposite was true, because then everyone's skin, as a general observation, was lighter. So therefore, if you had some color, it meant you had the means to travel or the means for leisure or the means to be somewhere that had sun.
And also, when we say you had color to your skin, we're talking again about white people because...
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Because only certain kinds of color, society said, in certain times was okay and beautiful, right? So when we originally started recording this episode and Katie started sharing her research, I kept feeling like we were missing something in regards to tanning and skin tone, especially speaking about it as white women. So I started looking at blogs by various people of color, mostly women, just to hear their opinions and voices on this matter. And turns out there are some deeper problems with white women and tanning than just skin damage and strange societal beauty standards. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to share some direct quotes from a few women of color that I found in a couple blogs and article pieces, just to share a whole different perspective that us, Katie and I, as white women did not even think about, but we definitely should have, and we definitely need to pay attention to. So we wanted to come back and just pay attention to that piece about tanning.
Yeah, I'm really thankful that you did this because, again, yes, this is our podcast, so of course it's going to be our perspectives and our view of things. But one thing I spoke with you about when we were first coming up with the idea for this podcast was revisiting things. Not just showing up and being like, hey, this is my experience with this TV show or pagers or tanning, but to also like go back and sort of say, well, what I've always thought about this thing or this show or this celebrity or whatever we're talking about, is that really the full picture? And of course it never is. That's true for everyone. And particularly if we're talking about something from our formative years, we're older and wiser now. So I really appreciated that you brought this up, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you found.
Right. So I wasn't even sure what it was either. I just was like, something doesn't, I feel like we're missing something that we can't speak into, So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to read direct quotes from a few blogs. We'll have the link to those blogs in our show notes. Forgive me if I mispronounce names. I tried to look up pronunciations best of my ability. There was one blog I found on Pedestrian TV, was the blog article. It was just an opinion piece. And like I said, this is just the opinions of some people. It's not all people, obviously, but it was pretty common opinion between various people. Okay. So this was from a blog by I'm just going to spell it. How about I do that? It's SoAliha Iqbal. She is, identifies herself as South Asian.
Okay.
And here is her direct quote. I've gotten into controversial conversations about tanning since forever, as a brown woman who's had my skin either fetishized or demonized my entire life. On the one hand, I grew up with people telling me I was too dark for basically any of the typical pleasures in life. Too dark to play in the sun, too dark to find love, too dark to get hired in any of the careers I was interested in, too dark to wear bright colors or white, or literally anything that would make me stand out in a crowd. That I should stick to wearing black so the contrast would make my skin look lighter to make me appear whiter, less like what I am, to hide. I was constantly given unsolicited advice on how to appear lighter, recommended creams to bleach my skin, and a million fixes to my clearly horrible affliction of having melanin. Okay, I'm about to say some bad words. I should have put a preemptive in there.
Bad words on the way. I'm ready.
Obviously, shit like that shatters your self-image. And as a South Asian woman, I'm definitely not the worst affected by this. I can't imagine what this is like for people with darker skin. Interestingly, as I got older, the attacks I got from my skin were often laced with a weird kind of envy. Not that it did much to curb the already deep insecurity and internalized disgust I felt at my brown skin, but it's something that's intensified to the point where these days, the same people who used to gag at the idea of loving someone with my skin tone now want it.
Ooh, wow. That's a really powerful line.
I thought so too.
For sure.
So basically she's saying like, I was demonized, fetishized for my skin, but meanwhile you're just allowed to have it because it's cool or whatever, right?
Yeah, you can go pay for it or attempt to look that way,
right?
If you want to,
right. She shared a story about when she was a young teen and she was on a beach and there were a couple white girls her age that kept complimenting how dark she was. And she says this, direct quote, "They were talking about my skin like it was a costume or something to try on and not something that is literally a part of my body." So again, kind of fetishizing just what her skin is, right? She also, some of what she talks about is tanning itself, like, going out in the sun and tanning, but also the use of fake tanner, which carries a whole nother layer of this putting something on just to try it on. And this is what she says about fake tanner. Direct quote, "Allows white people who fake tan to have the benefits of melanin with none of the racism that comes with it. So they can try on brown beauty, but not brown trauma. So they can remain cushioned by white privilege, but have the spice of exotic, read ethnic, women. So they're still clearly and recognizably a white person, but they have the benefits of my tortured melanin. White women who tan to change their skin to a color that the world has told them is desirable, who fetishize the very brown skin that actual brown people are shamed for, are often reinforcing the same toxic and honestly racist beauty standards that have excluded me from brown beauty in the first place."
Yeah. I don't want to add too much because I think this is her words and her perspective, and she's summing it up really well. And it's not really like my place to interpret or say whatever, but I will say that she brings up a lot of points I hadn't really thought of.
Same.
And I can see myself being one of those white girls on the beach. I don't think I was, but like, just thinking I'm complimenting another woman, but really I'm pretty out of line and fetishizing something about them, that, as she mentions, may come with, trauma and some other things attached. So
right.
I appreciate her perspective on that and had not thought of it that way.
I hadn't either. I mean, and I also know that I have been those girls on the beach. Yeah. And I've said that I can remember saying that as a teenager to friends of mine who had, various different backgrounds. Like, oh, I wish my skin was brown like yours. And, yes, you're not meaning to be harmful.
Right.
But the impact still is. So intention really doesn't matter if the impact is harmful, right?
Absolutely. And when as cliche as it is, when you know better, do better, right? Like,
right.
You think about it now and you're like, oh, gosh, that really wasn't great when I did that or even had that thought. But, I can tell you I won't ever do it again in my whole life.
Right.
So there's
know
that.
better, do better.
Right.
And then collect your people on it, right?
That too. That too.
Which is what we're trying to do now, is collect ourselves on this, right? So there was another piece I found. This was actually an Australian blogger. So this isn't just a strictly American issue. And we talk about that later in the episode as well.
Yeah, how it's big in Australia. And
yes.
Yep.
So another issue with white women in tanning, whether it's tanning beds like we're talking about, or fake tanning like the fake tanners, has to do with the term blackfishing, which I have heard before, but they explain it in this blog really well. And there's multiple authors, so I'm just going to read you their words. So the first author is Seema Bakshi, and she, direct quote, says, "Blackfishing is a relatively new concept, at least the dialogue around it is anyway, and does not exactly mean to necessarily mock qualities of BIPOC people." That means Black, Indigenous people of color, but rather seeks to emulate those identifiers. So, end quote. So basically, blackfishing is where you're trying to have the qualities of a certain ethnic group. You're trying not mocking them. You're just trying to emulate them. Think, making your skin darker, obviously.
Yeah.
Again, she says, while many may argue that it's a good thing that these stereotypically Black features are being celebrated and coveted, the issue with blackfishing is that it is white women who are being celebrated, and white women who are capitalizing on these traits, white women who have never had to experience the racism and daily injustices that Black women have endured. So basically, you get to just try it on, kind of like the other blogger mentioned in her piece as well. Also, the fact, too, is that, like we were just talking about, blackfishing can be completely unintentional. But what another person says in this blog piece, her name is Sukriti Wahi, direct quote, says, though a lack of intention does not excuse the problematic outcome. So like I was saying, your intention doesn't really matter if the impact hurts. A lot of times I think we try to validate misbehaviors by saying, but I didn't mean that. I didn't mean it in that way. Well,
again, right. Yeah. I think that's such a great point. And even the thing where we were talking about complimenting someone on the beach, to be like, well, I was just being nice. I was saying I liked that thing. But again, if the end result of that is hurting someone or making light of something that's really systematic to them, that you're just in that moment kind of enjoying for whatever reason, then that's not good.
Another thing they talked about in this blog too is not saying that you shouldn't, if you're a white person or European person, you should not tan. They're just saying you need to think about what that can mean. That there's a lot of layers there that we may not understand. So another quote that Wahi says is this, direct quote, "If you are non-Black or a non-POC, I think it's worth paying attention to how you tan and asking if you are going beyond what is natural and normal for you. And if yes, why you think that you should tan to that point. These sorts of things seem insidious on the surface, but over time can contribute to a colorist beauty standard where BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, are still underrepresented and continuously shut out. While a white person can wipe their tan off at the end of the day when they are sick of it, people of color cannot."
Yeah, I think these are some really great pieces. Thanks again for finding them. And they certainly inform, they're making me think too, like where she just said, if you are, why are you tanning?
Right.
Is this what is normal for you? And I know, like for me, and I've mentioned in this episode that, acne, right? I felt like it helped my acne, or some people even, it helps with seasonal affective disorder, having sort of that, either the real sun if you're outside or that fake sun. But if it's an aesthetic, beyond not wanting to have acne, but like a skin tone aesthetic, then that is something you need to maybe think about, you being me and everyone. Right. So I really appreciate this, and thanks for adding this in before the rest of our conversation on this.
Yeah. Just something to think about. Just making sure we're considering all the layers. So back to tanning beds.
Yes, back to tanning. So I kind of mentioned at the top of the episode that it really isn't all bad, and I just want to be like very fair in my presentation today, that there are a lot of reasons people love tanning beds, young people, older people, and why we liked it. The first, which we've talked about, is the way it makes us look. Again, whether that's how we feel internally or whether we're getting that from an external source, that might be something that makes us feel that way. I'm going to touch on skin issues a little bit, but I know when I was a teenager, I had acne really bad, and tanning kept it at bay. Really? It did.
See, mine had no effect.
Yeah.
It had no effect on my acne, but I get it because I saw, some people feel like that helped them have clear skin. So
yeah. And I read a really interesting article in Cosmo, and the author was interviewing another person. I think she was interviewing a 27-year-old white woman, and it was posted within the last year. So a pretty recent article, and relatively young woman. And the woman was just explaining that she knows tanning is bad for her, but she goes because the other side of it is so bad for her. Her self-esteem is kind of tied to how she looks, as well as like depression and things like that. So, you can psychoanalyze that all you want.
Yeah,
that
that's a sticky web.
Maybe you need, but she was basically saying like, I'm not going to stop because these benefits to me kind of outweigh it. So it's just interesting to see how people kind of weigh the risks in their lives for either real happiness or perceived happiness. But tanning, tanning in general, so not just tanning beds, but like being out in the sun and having that UVR and having that triggers synthesis of vitamin D in our bodies. And so we know some of the benefits of vitamin D: improved mood, which I kind of talked about. Your risk of depression goes down. It can improve your immunity, and it also can actually help your bone health.
Right.
So you have less risk of osteoporosis when you get to be a certain age, which we're approaching.
Ooh, well, it is interesting because, I mean, being in the sun is not bad. Right. We do need vitamin D. And we were a military family for almost 20 years. So we moved around a lot. And I've lived in places where it was cold and gray a lot of the time, and it affects your mood because your body needs that vitamin D.
Yeah.
But the tricky part with your skin, anytime your skin changes color, that's not good, right? Because even and I don't know if you talk about you are about to talk about it, so I won't say it yet. Anytime you quote unquote tan, there's no healthy way to do that because that's skin damage.
It's damage. That's why it looks like that. Right.
But the vitamin D we need, which is why sunscreen is important, because then what that does is you're still getting the vitamin D that you need, but it's protecting you from the yucky stuff.
Exactly. It can keep that away. Absolutely. And the UVR rays produce endorphins, which you're sort of talking about. I grew up in the Midwest, same thing. 9 months out of the year, it felt like we're gray. The cold is not fun, but more than the cold, it's the gray.
The sun, yes.
And that can really be harmful long term. So endorphins, of course, trigger overall feelings of well-being, contentment, and happiness. Some people, particularly there were a few studies I found on fibromyalgia who said that artificial UVRs, so tanning beds, actually help reduce their pain.
Oh.
As a form of treatment for different pain conditions. And then, of course, the skin disorders, right? For some people, right? I mentioned my acne, but I also have eczema.
Oh.
And it helps with that a lot. Psoriasis, dermatitis. And there's studies as far back as the 1950s that when UV light penetrates the skin, it combats the cells causing a skin disorder. So it's not even like a surface thing, like it's just covering up the acne or covering up the eczema. It's actually doing something to the cells.
Okay, so that blows my mind because the same thing that can cause you something horrible and toxic can also cure something
that's, and I can say as a person with eczema, so it's something I'm always managing in my life, right? Like it will never go away. And at different points in life, there have been different ways I've had to manage it. And I can say that it is cosmetic, but it's also a quality of life thing.
Oh, yeah.
If you're always in pain or itching or worried about how it looks or whatever, it really does impact you. And I know psoriasis is probably even worse than that.
Right.
Trying to kind of deal with that. So again, some of these things can be treated maybe with natural sunlight and sunscreen, but if you're somewhere that you're not having the natural sunlight, it's, you can kind of understand why for people, if this is a big part of their life, the eczema, the psoriasis, the dermatitis, that this risk for them might be worth it to an extent. Not condoning it, of course, but I can understand why people would feel that way. And this one's funny. So this last one I actually found, and then I was like, this is an interesting source. And it was like a company that sells tanning beds. So I was like, why am I on this
course.
site? It can prevent sunburn because you get a base tan.
Which is a myth, everyone. That is not true. That is like dermatologists, when you go to the dermatologist, I don't know if you've never been, they'll have like posters on the wall with like skin facts. And I have seen that on skin myths.
Yeah.
Right. With facts under it. This is like the top one I've seen like so many times. There's no such thing as a base tan. Like that's still skin. It's still skin damage.
It's all damage.
Yes.
It's just varying degrees of damage.
Right.
Okay. So, those are some of the quote unquote benefits, or maybe not benefits, but maybe a better way to say it is the reasons people might want to still use tanning beds, even though we know things. So let's move into the risks. And so I just want to start this by saying overall, artificial tanning is very bad for you. If you've done it a lot, if you still do it, and hearing about how bad it is, if it's going to cause you anxiety, you can stop the episode. We're not offended. Yes. You can skip forward. That's not really what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to make you panic or have sleepless nights, but I really was very interested in this topic myself and delving into it a little more. So that's what we're going to talk about now. So just a little warning there, a little disclaimer. And so we're going to start with the scariest thing first. The World Health Organization classifies tanning beds or any ultraviolet tanning devices as a group 1 carcinogen.
Get out of here. Really?
It's on the list with all the really bad things.
Wow.
Right on there next to tobacco, smoke, and smokeless. Radon and mustard gas are on that list.
Wow. I mean, that checks, but to hear it explained that way.
Yeah. And of course, there's nuance to that, right? Like exposure to radon, it's not the same amount of time. Like the exposure to radon over X amount of time is worse for you than the same amount of time with UVR. But it is on there. And, and that's because it's a source of UV radiation, which causes skin cancer, including melanoma, which is, if you're not sure what the difference is between skin cancer and melanoma, again, not a dermatologist, not a professional, but generally speaking, skin cancers are usually the ones you can see that you can, kind of have removed, that sort of thing. Melanoma is more serious and often you can't see it. Also, UV radiation causes skin aging associated with sunburn. It can have interactions with the medications you take. It's funny because it says weakening of the immune system, but then another source said it can boost your immune system. But I think that's related to maybe the vitamin D. And maybe the weakening is related to something else. And another one that people don't think about a lot is that damage to your eyes.
Yeah.
That it can cause cataracts, snow blindness, cancer in your eyes.
Which is super weird because my mom, who is now, I'm 43. She's 75. Okay. She used to go to the tanning bed all the time in the 90s. In fact, she went so much. She was a nurse. She worked at at an ER. Okay. Yeah. Medical people, I will tell you, I'm from a family of medical people. They're the worst with following their own advice. Okay.
Yeah.
My sister's a nurse practitioner and smoked for so long. She finally quit. So hooray for that.
Yay,
but
for her.
Anyway, my mom would go to the tanning bed all the time. So much so she would have a bikini bottom. And now why she wouldn't just go naked, I don't know, because you're by yourself. But or it was important to her to wear those bottoms and the goggles.
Yep.
Remember, you'd get these little plastic goggles, but sometimes she wouldn't wear them. And guess what? She has the beginnings of cataracts.
Does
now.
she really?
Yeah.
Do you know offhand if that runs in your family? Like, did any of
I
her
don't think
siblings or
so.
parents? Yeah.
My grandma did not. I don't know. We haven't. It's just she's had a few like procedures done or whatever, and she's okay. But like it's the beginning, some eyesight problems, and I never made that correlation till like this second.
Yeah. Well, so generally speaking, skin stuff.
Right.
And we'll hear about this on future episodes. I'm sort of like a fanatic on researching brain health and things like that.
Right.
So brain health and skin health are really interesting because often we're doing damage that doesn't show up till 20 or 30 years later.
Right.
It's not, I mean, I guess you could say that about all your organs, but it's especially tricky with skin and brain. And just like a quick little side note, I had a friend, she was a couple years older than me, but who I grew up with. And she was diagnosed with a stage 3 melanoma when she was 28 weeks pregnant. She was about 31 or 32 at the time. So this was almost a decade ago when all this happened. And she was pretty fair skinned. She hadn't really, I think she'd gone to tanning beds a few times, but not like I did. But it was kind of unusual for her to have it. Long story short, she did pass away from it.
Oh,
They weren't able to operate till she had her baby. She actually lived 3 or 4 more years. Was cancer free. It came back. Cancer free. It came back. And when she was still alive and we were talking about it, because I was completely freaked out.
Course.
Like, of course, very sad for her and her family, but like on a selfish level, like, oh my gosh.
Well, we all do that.
And I asked her like, what, like, do you know what might have caused this? And she said that her oncologist told her the biggest risk for skin cancer, a melanoma, like a life-altering, potentially end-your-life melanoma, is a severe sunburn.
Yes.
At age 10 or under.
Right. Yeah.
How many of us had a severe sunburn when we were kids?
On that same note, my mother-in-law, my husband's stepmom, she had a battle with skin cancer a few years ago. She's doing great now. On her nose, she had to have a piece removed from there. But she grew up. Her family was military. A lot of her formative years were spent on Guam. Never wore sunscreen. Ever was like sunburned and like for her whole, a lot of her childhood. And they told her the same thing.
Yeah. And it's crazy, of course, all of us now who are parents can kind of internalize that and try to prevent it, of course. But I mean, at least when I was growing up, of course, we had things like sunscreens and our parents were like, oh yeah, we don't want them to like get burnt to a crisp. But getting a sunburn or whatever was sort of just like part of childhood.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It just meant you were out there having fun at the beach or having fun with your friends, especially in the Midwest, because the sun wasn't out all year.
Well, and I grew up in South Louisiana where the sun was out all the time. So you were outside without sun. I never remember putting on sunscreen.
I don't think I did
until
either.
I was older.
Yeah.
Like really. I put on tanning oil.
Oh, yeah.
Gross.
Me too. Or baby oil.
Yeah. Like bacon frying in the sun.
Oh, totally.
But I mean, we would go to the beach all day. No sunscreen.
Oh yeah. Same. Absolutely same. And it's so kind of back to what we were saying with like the cataracts and things like that. I think with skin and with brain, a lot of times we sort of are just like, well, you're older, you're getting cataracts. Well, you're older, you're forgetting things. Instead of sort of looking back and maybe looking at some of what of those things might have been along the way that led to that point. But based on the high number of people that used tanning beds and continue to, it's estimated that the devices cause more than 400,000 cases of skin cancer. Now, those aren't fatal diagnoses, but still. But that is twice as many as lung cancer diagnoses.
Wow.
200,000 lung cancer diagnoses each year, 400,000 skin cancer. Now, lung cancer kills more people.
Right.
But there are less diagnoses.
And that was like a recent study?
Yeah, so I believe that one was 2017.
Because I wonder now, because there's been so much more awareness with skin cancer, and there's been a lot more early diagnoses. Like you said, it's not a fatal diagnosis anymore. that people are going and getting those annual skin checks.
Yes.
And finding things sooner. And then maybe they have been before.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe,
I mean, I don't know.
Maybe it isn't that the actual cases are going up. It's just that they're being reported. Yeah, that's a great point. But it is a good kind of comparison, right? For, we just assume all these people and that those deaths by or diagnoses of lung cancer are going down too.
Right.
From the highs. But since 1992, the U.S. rates of melanoma, which again was once considered an quote unquote old person's disease, they've risen 3% a year in white women ages 15 to 39. And anyone who uses a tanning salon before age 35 increases their risk of melanoma by 75%.
Ouch.
Yeah. And again, melanoma's the bad one. That one's, again, completely treatable, not necessarily a death sentence, but it is definitely more difficult to get rid of than the skin cancer that can be removed. I have a little more on melanoma here. Melanoma only accounts for 1% of skin cancer, right? But it does cause the most skin cancer related deaths. And the average diagnosis of that is 63. So it isn't always young people, but it is the most common cancer of all cancers in the 25 to 29 age group. Second most common in 15 to 29. And they think that's probably because of increased use of indoor tanning. And my friend was in that, that 25 to 29 age group. So when she was diagnosed. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
A little bit more there. But the commercial, so governments in general are trying to respond to this, right? Obviously, there's a big commercial push to keep this sort of thing going. But the commercial use of tanning beds was actually banned entirely in Brazil in 2009. And Australia, which I mentioned earlier, has one of the highest per capita for melanoma and skin cancers. They banned them completely in 2015.
Dang.
So the latest I could find on this was January 2017, that there were 13 U.S. states and one territory that have banned people under 18 using them.
I didn't know you could even use them under 18.
It depends on the state. It's a states' right thing. So some states you need parental consent, but some you don't.
Whoa.
Isn't that crazy? 6 states have banned them completely.
Not Florida.
Yes.
Florida's too busy banning books.
Yeah,
so they can't actually ban things that really impact people.
That will actually physically kill you.
Goodness.
But 42 states and the District of Columbia have imposed regulations.
Well, that's
like
good, at least.
Consent and stuff like that. Yeah. But I found this really cool quote, not cool, but kind of like from a British health official. Her name's Lisa Bickerstaff. And she said, kind of what you were saying earlier, Danny, we know there's no such thing as a safe tan from UV rays. Therefore, the British Skin Foundation, in line with other health organizations, does not recommend, and they call them sunbed use, tanning bed use. So it's overall bad. I mean, it's interesting because I'm trying to figure out what are the ways, and maybe a dermatologist is the right route if you're like, oh, I have eczema, and so far my whole life the only thing that's worked are tanning beds or sun. Like, what can I do?
Well, I know they do have a lot of cool treatments now in offices that are localized, because I keep thinking when my mom had early diagnosed breast cancer in her early 40s, and she never had to do chemo or anything. She did radiation. Because it was, it's localized. And I know they do some of that in offices now. I don't know too much about it because I haven't had it done. But I wonder if that...
I would imagine there's treatments like that too.
Where it's just kind of more laser pointed. Or maybe they use lasers. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they do. But I see what you're saying. Instead of baking your entire body, maybe you just pick one little area that you want to address. And, we've been talking about what we did back in the day and how we kind of know better and how it does seem like tanning's slowing down. But there is still a lot of people who are going to tanning beds, including young people. And in fact, depends which study I looked at, but some of them showed that it has dipped and it's back on the rise. I actually Googled celebrities who use tanning beds just to see what I found. And it's like, the Kardashians, and I think Jennifer Aniston was on there. Again, these kind of icons of beauty or fashion or culture are still doing this to some extent. And I kind of just saw something that was basically saying, also that there's a hashtag on TikTok, hashtag tan lines.
No.
That has more than 430 million views.
Ew. Well, I mean,
so it's people tanning, talking about tan lines, that sort of thing. It's still a huge part of U.S. culture. According to a recent beauty market research report, tanning salons are a $2.8 billion industry. And they're growing. They're not going down. And then also the self-tanner market is a $1 billion industry, which maybe the author I saw who wrote this said it may be a safer way to glow. But the message is still clear. People want to be tan.
Okay, I have issues with that because that's pushing where, I don't know. You know what? I mean, yeah, it's still a thing. I just told you before we started recording this, they just opened a tanning salon down the street from my house. Mm-hmm. Like, I remember driving past. It's like right next to the Kava bar, which is a huge thing. Anyway, I was like, "What? Why are we still having those?"
Yeah.
And you said, you still have them at your gym.
Yep.
But I mean, again, people still smoke. Mm-hmm. Cigarettes are still out there.
Absolutely. And again, I don't want the episode at all to be judgment at all. I wanted this to kind of be something I'm particularly curious about because I went so much at what I feel is a formative age, and I'm not yet the age, but I'm getting close to where if there was damage, then it's going to start showing up. I'm going to start seeing the bumps or the sun damage or the whatever. I'm getting there.
Oh, I am. I've got sunspots. I've never had sunspots in my life. Mm-hmm. When I went to the dermatologist a year ago for adult acne, because hooray, did you know you still have acne in your 40s?
You get acne and sunspots.
Yes.
It's awesome.
Menopause and acne. So I was like, what are all this discolorations? He's like, it's sun damage, sunspots. Yeah.
Period.
And I wear sunscreen, but it's all the old things.
It's all the old things and the cells that we can't see that were changed or mutated or whatever it may be, whatever the terminology is. So, we don't have a lot of great news on that front to end on, but I just think, it's a really interesting piece of pop culture that, to be honest, when I started to research this, I was going to be like, oh my God, we were so silly. It's great that died out. And then the more I read, the more I was like, oh, it really didn't. Some of us just kind of got wise to what was going on and made the choice to walk away from it. But it's still not very regulated. Not really.
No.
And it's, the site I found, it helps you not sunburn. That's still out there. That was a Google search. That was one of the top things. And I, a journalist, was reading through it. And was like, what site am I on? And I had to go look. And I'm like, oh, this
always
is
check your sources, everyone.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this is crazy. So whether you tan or don't tan or whatever your choice is, hopefully you learned a little bit today, and hopefully you enjoyed the episode.
Get your skin checked every year and wear your SPF.
Absolutely. And thanks for listening to Generation in Between, a Xennial or Xennial podcast. If you liked what you heard today, share us with your friends of all generations and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also find us on Patreon and become a monthly supporter. You'll have access to bonus episodes and other perks that only our patrons get. That information is also linked in our show notes. So until next time, wear your goggles and bikini bottom or
SPF.
And but mostly that.
And a hat.
Bye, guys.
Okay, bye.